"We're busy celebrating your brother," my mom said when I invited them to my graduation dinner. 3 hours later, my mom posted, "Family toast for the real winner." It was him. He bought a motorcycle. I covered the $2,450 bill, went home, and shut off the business loan I'd been paying for 2 years. On their desk, I left a note. Let him handle it. I, 29M, sat in my car outside the restaurant, staring at my phone like it might suddenly apologize for what I'd just read. The message from Mom was still there, glowing against the dark interior. "We're busy celebrating your brother. Maybe next time. Maybe next time." As if graduating with my MBA after 3 years of night classes while running my own consulting firm was something that could just wait. As if it was just another dinner, another casual invitation she could dismiss with 3 words and a period. I'd made the reservation 2 weeks ago, told them about it 10 days ago, sent a reminder 3 days ago. The restaurant was expensive, the kind of place where they bring you a tiny appetizer you didn't order just to show off. I'd been looking forward to this for months, imagining my parents sitting across from me, finally seeing what I'd accomplished, finally being proud. The graduation ceremony had been that afternoon. I'd walked across the stage, shook the dean's hand, and felt that surge of accomplishment that comes from doing something genuinely difficult. My girlfriend sat in the audience, cheering. My best friend from the program was there. But the 2 seats I'd reserved for my parents stayed empty. I texted Mom after the ceremony. She replied that something came up with my brother and they couldn't make it. She promised they'd be at dinner though. She promised. Now I sat alone in my car, watching other families walk into the restaurant through the warm glow of the entrance. I should have known better. I didn't know better. But some stupid part of me kept hoping things would be different. My brother was 26, 3 years younger than me, and he'd been the favorite since we were kids. It wasn't even subtle. When I got a B, I was lazy. When he got a C, he was trying his best. When I bought my first car with money I'd saved from 2 jobs, Dad clapped me on the shoulder and said it was about time I stood on my own feet. When my brother wrecked his car street racing, Dad co-signed for a new one. I'd learned to live with it. Learned to stop expecting fairness, stop measuring their love and how they treated him versus how they treated me. I built my own life, my own success, my own version of family with friends who actually showed up. But apparently, I hadn't learned well enough, because here I was, still hoping. I went into the restaurant anyway. My girlfriend met me there, and we had a quiet dinner. She held my hand across the table and told me she was proud of me, that what I'd accomplished was incredible. I believed her. It helped, but it didn't fill the empty chairs. 3 hours later, scrolling through social media before bed, I saw Mom's post. She'd uploaded a photo to Facebook with a caption that made my chest tighten. "Family toast for the real winner." The picture showed my parents, my brother, and my aunt and uncle crowded around a table at their favorite steakhouse. Everyone was raising glasses. In the center of the photo, my brother straddled a motorcycle, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. The comments were already rolling in. "Congratulations. So proud. What a beautiful bike." I read the post 3 times. The real winner. Not the a-hole. The real one. As if there'd been some competition I didn't know about, and I'd lost. I called my girlfriend. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft with sleep. I told her about the post. She went quiet for a moment, then said what I'd been thinking but couldn't quite say out loud. This was never about scheduling. They'd made a choice. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I went to the restaurant to settle my bill from the reservation. I told them I'd be bringing 4 people. I'd ordered appetizers for the table, a nice bottle of wine, the works. The bill came to $2,450. I stared at it, thinking about the motorcycle, thinking about the toast, thinking about 3 years of night classes and empty chairs. I paid it. I paid every cent, added a generous tip because none of this was the server's fault, and walked out. My hands shook on the drive home, not from sadness anymore, from something else, something that felt like a door closing. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being the unfavored child. You spend your whole life trying to prove you're worth loving. You achieve things, not just for yourself, but to earn the pride that should have been freely given. You succeed louder, work harder, become more, all while pretending you don't care about their approval. But I did care. I'd always cared. And that caring had cost me more than money. 2 years ago, my parents came to me with a problem. They wanted to expand the family business, a small printing company Dad had been running for 20 years. They needed capital. Banks weren't being generous with their terms. My brother had just dropped out of his second attempt at community college and wasn't in any position to help. So they came to me. I'd already built my consulting firm into something stable and profitable. I had good credit, solid income, and apparently, I was the son they remembered when they needed something. They asked me to co-sign on a business loan for $85,000. Said they'd pay it back themselves, that I wouldn't have to worry about a thing, that this was just a formality for the bank. I should have said no. Every financial advisor I'd ever worked with would have told me to say no. But they were my parents. And maybe, I thought, this could be the thing that finally shifted how they saw me. The responsible son. The one who came through when it mattered. They got the loan. They expanded the business. And within 3 months, they started missing payments. At first, it was just one. Dad called to apologize, said there'd been an unexpected equipment cost, that they'd catch up next month. Then it was 2 payments. Then 3. The bank started calling me. My credit score started dropping. I confronted my parents, and Dad got defensive. Said business was harder than I understood, that not all of us had fancy consulting degrees, that I should be more patient with family. So I started making the payments myself. For 2 years, I'd been paying $1,400 a month on their business loan. For 2 years, I justified it as helping family, as being the bigger person, as doing what needed to be done. Meanwhile, my brother lived at home rent-free, went through a series of jobs he'd quit because they were beneath him, and apparently, had just bought a motorcycle expensive enough to warrant a family celebration. I sat in my home office, looking at my records. 24 months of payments. $33,600 out of my pocket. Money that could have gone toward the down payment on a house. Money that could have been invested. Money that could have funded a dozen graduation dinners I'd never have. The loan had been set up with automatic payments from my account. I'd arranged it that way to protect my credit when it became clear my parents wouldn't be reliable. All I had to do was log into the bank portal and turn it off. My cursor hovered over the button for a long time. I thought about calling first, explaining, giving them a chance to make this right. But what would I say? That I was hurt. They knew that I needed them to prioritize me for once. They'd had 29 years to do that. That the loan was their responsibility? We'd had that conversation 24 times. I clicked the button. The automatic payment was canceled. The bank would notify them when the next payment didn't go through. But that didn't feel like enough. They needed to understand this wasn't just about money. This was about every choice they'd made, every time they'd picked him over me, every moment I'd been invisible while he was celebrated for doing the bare minimum. I drove to their house. They were both at work, the printing company they'd expanded with money I was still paying for. I let myself in with the key they'd given me years ago, back when they still sometimes asked me to check on things. The house smelled like coffee and my mother's lavender candles. Photos lined the hallway, a gallery of family moments. I stopped to look at them, really look. My brother's high school graduation, even though he barely passed. My brother's 21st birthday party. My brother at various holidays, sporting events, random Tuesdays. I had to walk almost to the end of the hall to find a photo of myself, and it was from my college graduation 6 years ago. I was standing alone in my cap and gown. They'd taken it, then left early to catch my brother's baseball game. I walked to my father's office. His desk was organized chaos, papers and invoices scattered across the surface. I found a piece of their business letterhead and wrote, "Let him handle it." 4 words. That's all I needed. They'd understand. I placed the note in the center of the desk, weighted down with a stapler so it wouldn't get lost in the mess. Then I walked out, locked the door behind me, and drove home. The call came 6 days later. Not right away when the payment bounced, because apparently, they didn't even notice at first. The bank had to call them. Mom's number showed up on my phone at 8:30 in the morning. I let it ring. She called again. I silenced it. Then Dad called. Then my brother. Then Mom again. I turned my phone off and went to work. By the time I turned it back on that evening, I had 14 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. The early ones were confused. The middle ones were angry. The last few were almost pleading. Dad's final text said I was destroying the family business, that I was being selfish, that he'd never asked me for anything. Never asked me for anything. As if the $33,600 had manifested out of thin air. I didn't respond to any of them. What was there to say? The loan had both our names on it. The business was legally half my responsibility, which meant it was also legally half theirs. If they couldn't make the payments, they'd have to figure out another solution, just like any other business owner would. Just like I'd had to figure out my own solutions my entire life. 3 days passed. The calls slowed down. Then my aunt called, the same one who'd been in the celebratory motorcycle photo. She asked what was going on, said my parents were devastated, that I was tearing the family apart over money. I asked her if she'd seen Mom's Facebook post from my brother's motorcycle celebration. She went quiet. I asked her how much that motorcycle cost. She said she didn't know, that it wasn't her business. I told her that my brother's bike probably cost more than the 2 months of loan payments my parents were suddenly so worried about. I told her I'd just graduated with my MBA, and nobody had even bothered to call and congratulate me. I told her I'd spent $2,450 on a celebration dinner I ate alone. She said I was being vindictive. That family meant forgiving. That I was hurting people out of spite. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was vindictive. But vindication and vindictiveness come from the same place. And I was tired of pretending I didn't deserve some of both. I told her the loan was my parents' responsibility and hung up. Update 1. It's been 3 weeks since I canceled the payment. I didn't expect to write an update, but things have developed in ways I need to document, if only for my own sanity. The first week was mostly silence after my aunt's call. I went to work, came home, lived my life. My girlfriend moved in some of her things. We talked about looking at houses now that I wasn't hemorrhaging $1,400 a month. It felt good. It felt like progress. Then my brother showed up at my office. I was in a meeting when my assistant knocked and said someone was there to see me. I wrapped up early, walked out to the lobby, and there he was. He looked different than in the motorcycle photo. Tired. Uncomfortable. He asked if we could talk. I took him to a coffee shop down the street because I didn't want this conversation anywhere near my professional life. He started by saying he didn't know I'd been paying the loan, that our parents had never told him, that if he'd known, things would have been different. I didn't believe him, but I let him talk. He said the motorcycle was a mistake, that he was going to sell it, that the family needed to come together. He said Mom had been crying every night, that Dad's blood pressure was through the roof, that I was killing them with stress. I asked him why he thought any of that was my problem. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. He tried a different angle. Said we were brothers, that brothers helped each other, that family was supposed to stick together. I reminded him that he'd never once helped me. Not with the business loan, not with anything. I asked him what he'd sacrificed for the family. He said he'd given up his independence to live at home and help with things. I almost laughed. Living rent-free wasn't a sacrifice. It was a subsidy. He got angry then. Said I'd always thought I was better than him, that I looked down on him, that I was using this loan thing to punish him for being loved. That last part was interesting. Not for being loved more, just for being loved at all, as if my being loved was never even on the table. I told him the loan was between me and our parents, that he should stay out of it. He said I dragged him into it by walking away. I stood up and left him sitting there. That night, Mom called from Dad's phone. I answered because I was tired of running. She said they needed to talk, all of us together, to work this out like adults. I said I was willing to meet, but only if we talked about everything, not just the loan. She agreed. We met at a neutral location, a restaurant neither of us had history with. Mom, Dad, and me. My brother wasn't there, which was somehow both surprising and perfectly predictable. Dad started with an apology. Said they should have been at my graduation, that they should have made me a priority, that they understood I was hurt. It sounded rehearsed. Mom nodded along, her eyes red. I asked them why they chose my brother's motorcycle over my MBA celebration. Dad said it wasn't like that my brother had been having a really hard time and needed something to lift his spirits. That the bike was his first major purchase, his first step toward being independent. I pointed out that I'd been independent since I was 22, and they'd never thrown me a party for it. Mom started crying. She said I was being cruel, that they'd made mistakes, but I was making it worse. I asked her about the Facebook post, about calling my brother the real winner. She claimed it was just a phrase, that it didn't mean anything. I pulled out my phone and showed her the post. Read the caption out loud. Asked her to explain what she'd meant if not exactly what she'd written. She didn't have an answer. Dad changed tactics. Said the business would fold without my help, that 20 years of his work would disappear, that employees would lose their jobs. I asked him why that was my responsibility. He said because I was on the loan, because I'd agreed to help. I reminded him that he'd promised I wouldn't have to pay a cent. He admitted he'd been wrong about that. Admitted the business hadn't grown the way he'd hoped. Admitted he should have been more honest with me. Then he asked what I wanted. What would it take for me to start making payments again? I told them I wanted 2 years of acknowledgement. 2 years of being seen the way they saw my brother every single day. I wanted them to understand that I'd been subsidizing their favoritism, literally paying for the privilege of being treated like the backup child. Mom said that wasn't fair, that they loved us both the same. I asked her to prove it. To tell me the last time she'd posted about me on Facebook. To tell me the last time they'd chosen me over him when there was a conflict. To explain why my graduation wasn't worth rescheduling whatever they'd had planned with my brother. She couldn't. We sat in silence for a while. Then Dad asked what I wanted going forward. I told him I'd be willing to discuss a payment plan where they gradually took over the loan, but only if my brother contributed. After all, he was living rent-free in a house they were paying for with money I was providing. He could start covering some expenses. Dad said my brother didn't have that kind of money. I suggested he sell the motorcycle. Mom looked horrified. Said they couldn't ask him to do that the bike was important to him. I stood up, told them that was my answer then. If a motorcycle was more important than their relationship with me, then their business, then 2 years of my financial support, then we had nothing left to talk about. Dad grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. Asked me not to do this. I told him I wasn't doing anything. I was just stopping doing something I should never have started. I walked out. Update 2. 5 weeks now. The situation has somehow gotten both better and worse. Better because I'm sleeping through the night again. Because my girlfriend and I put an offer on a house, and it was accepted. Because I'm not checking my bank account every month with dread. Because I feel lighter in a way I haven't in years. Worse because the family implosion is complete. My brother sold the motorcycle. I found out through Facebook, ironically. He posted a bitter message about sacrificing for family, about being the only one willing to compromise. The comments were sympathetic. Nobody knew the full story, so I looked like the villain. I didn't care enough to correct the record. The money from the bike sale apparently went toward the loan payment, but it wasn't nearly enough. My parents had to take out a second mortgage on their house to cover the gap and keep the business afloat. Dad's health issues weren't exaggerated. He ended up in the hospital with stress-related heart palpitations. Mom blamed me, told mutual family members I'd put him there. Maybe I did. Maybe refusing to set myself on fire to keep them warm was selfish. Maybe I should have just kept paying, kept smiling, kept pretending their choices didn't cut me deeper each time. But I didn't. And I won't. My extended family has mostly taken their side. The narrative they're spreading is that I abandoned my parents over money, that I'm bitter and jealous of my brother, that I'm punishing them for ancient history. Some cousins blocked me on social media. My aunt sent a long email about forgiveness and grace that I deleted without reading past the first paragraph. A few people reached out privately, though. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years told me she'd always noticed the difference in how they treated us. An old family friend said he was proud of me for setting boundaries. My girlfriend's parents, who I told the full story, said they couldn't imagine treating their children that way. It helped. Not enough to undo the damage, but enough to remind me I wasn't crazy. The business is struggling. I know because I still get copies of the loan statements since my name is on it. They're making minimum payments now, barely. My credit took a hit from the late payments before they figured things out, but it's recovering. Their business credit is probably destroyed. Part of me feels guilty about that. The part that still wants their approval, that still hopes for some fairy tale reconciliation where they suddenly understand and apologize, and we all heal. But that part gets smaller every day. Last week, my brother sent me a long text message. It was mostly defensive, explaining why he deserved the motorcycle, why he wasn't the golden child, why I was wrong about everything. But buried in the middle was something that almost sounded like awareness. He said he'd started to notice things, now that he was paying attention. How they made excuses for him that they never made for me. How they expected less from him and more from me. How that actually wasn't fair to either of us. He didn't apologize. Didn't say he'd talk to them about changing. Just acknowledged it existed. Then went right back to defending himself. I didn't respond. What would I say? That his almost awareness was 2 decades too late? That noticing the problem wasn't the same as fixing it? Yesterday was my birthday, 29 to 30. My girlfriend threw me a surprise party with my real family, the friends who'd been there through everything. We celebrated in the house we're about to buy, surrounded by people who chose to show up. My phone stayed silent all day. No call from my parents. No text from my brother. Nothing. I'd expected it. Hoped I was wrong, but expected it. Still hurt though. Probably always will, a little bit. But here's what I'm learning. Sometimes the relationship you save by setting boundaries is the one with yourself. Sometimes choosing your own peace means other people choose their comfort over you. Sometimes being the bigger person just means being the one left standing in an empty room. I don't regret canceling the payment. I don't regret the note. I don't regret walking away from that final dinner. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they made me choose between my financial stability and their approval. I regret that I ever thought I could earn love that should have been freely given. But I don't regret choosing myself. For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to prove I'm worth loving. I'm just living like I already am. And the people who belong in that life are showing up without being asked. The rest can keep their toasts and their motorcycles and their selective pride. I've got a graduation to celebrate, a house to move into, and a life to build with people who actually want to be in it. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.